How do you approach distribution or customer acquisition for that matter when you are targeting a niche customer segment in India while building a fintech product or a fintech itself?
It really helps to start with a niche, because when you have a niche set of customers, then you can build something that is truly differentiated for them.
How is lending as an industry, or as Kunal calls it, lending as a feature,
Yeah.
how is this feature different or treated different in, say, United States, Canada, North American context vis-a-vis an India context, now that you have done a similar work at startups like Cred and now at Slice?
Yeah. So fundamentally, there is nothing different. The act of giving credit creates the risk, and then you try to figure out how to mitigate that risk. But there are very many differences also.
Is lending the holy grail of fintechs?
So I think if you look at the current market and if you look at where the profit pools lie, lending is an obvious opportunity. You will see that you will gravitate towards profit pools.
How can they compound faster in terms of their understanding of lending much better and faster?
It's a very good question.
Welcome to the show, guys. Today I have a very, very special person who has joined us to have a chat around fintech, lending, a lot of stuff which I have been part of, but मुझे थोड़ा मोटा मोटा ही समझ में आता है, but the idea was कि थोड़ा deep समझते हैं, and let's try and bring in somebody who really understands that deep, from the risk part of building a product, from understanding what the product is from a regulation point of view also. He's worked in various geographies. Obviously he's based out of India right now, but has worked in North America as well, like Canada. And the idea is to explore, is lending the only holy grail to fintechs? And I think generally at large everybody ends up doing lending.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show, Kunal.
Thank you.
And
thank you for having me.
Yeah. तो मेरा तो यार पहला क्वेश्चन ये था कि like a lot of our good friends, you are also from IIT.
Yes.
and I think a lot of people have a very mixed opinion about what their life at IIT was. And why I'm bringing IIT is also because I keep wondering this, कि a lot of people who graduate from IIT or IIM, these are like top institutes in the country.
Yeah.
How much of that makes an impact in one's career?
Yeah.
Point two. But before that, if you could also speak about जो फर्स्ट डे आईआईटी में एंटर करते वक्त लग रहा था, वो कितनी जल्दी नॉर्मलाइज हो गया था?
वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन. सो आई हैड अ स्लाइटली डिफरेंट जर्नी. सो मेरा ऐसा था कि फर्स्ट टाइम आई एक्चुअली डिडंट गेट इनटू आईआईटी, एंड आई वेंट टू दिस स्मॉल कॉलेज इन तमिलनाडु, Tanjore, which was called Sastra, and I had a horrible time there. And the main problem that I saw was that people actually were very smart. So yeah, AIEEE was the mode of admission. So these people are all like 15 to 20,000 rank. So they've just missed IIT by a margin, like maybe 5 marks. So in terms of their actual intelligence, they're not that far off. But they had really given up on life. So if there was some problem in the institute, they say, अरे IIT थोड़ी ना है, राइट, यहाँ तो हो सकता है, कचरा पड़ा है बगल में हॉस्टल के, अरे IIT थोड़ी ना है. मैंने कहा ये क्या बकवास है, right? This should not happen. So I did a little bit of that netagiri in the institute, but then I was like, yeah, I can't be here. So then I moved back to my house against the wishes of my parents, and then for 3 months I studied, January, February, March, and then I got into IIT. So when I got into IIT, I already had that frame of reference कि यार बाकी जगह कैसा होता है. So therefore I was a lot more thankful about being in that place. So for me it lasted not for a day, but for a while. For a while I was like, कि हाँ यार, this is a different place, and I was able to contrast. And I think that was the primary differentiator between the two colleges. Intelligence level was, I think, maybe like the top 100 rankers are different, right? Like they are made different. But उसके अलावा बाकी लोग सब लोग normally होते हैं, ऐसा बहुत ज़्यादा difference नहीं होता. But the difference was in attitude. कि these people just thought कि यार हम तो कर लेंगे, कुछ भी कर लेंगे. And that started showing up in the very first month. So like if you went around the hostel, somebody is like a mathematics, ये math olympiad में rank 2 आया था, फिर एक और बंदे को जाओगे तो यार ये DPS आके में rank 1 था. So there was that almost this aura of all these people, who were all big achievers in their schools, and that led to an identity crisis. That what do I stand for here? right? And I think that's an identity crisis that a lot of people actually go through. And therefore, if you think about why people go into all of these diverse fields, it is from that need to have an identity. That's where people like really think about, okay, I was good at accounts on my life, but here I'm not that great. So I have to find something else to be really good at. That's why people do acting, people do like entrepreneurship and all those things, right? So for me, I identified that this is an opportunity where I can really try and lead. I felt that is something that I can do better than people. I communicate better and I organize better. So one of the main things that happened was, by the virtue of choosing this path, I got exposed to a lot of really smart, talented people very early. So I met some of the big singers and then I met President Abdul Kalam. I met Alec Padamsi. I met all of these people, and because I used to get that private space with them, you're going to receive them, so you have that sort of 30 minutes in a car, or you are arranging for the hotel for them, so you have that like 20 minutes that time. So I use that time and I like ask them questions, and the one clear realization I had in life is all these people know something in a lot of depth.
True.
So when it came time to decide what do you want to do in life, I was clear that yeah, at least one thing I need to know in a lot of depth. That is how successful people are made. So I was like, okay, I'll decide what, I don't know what that one thing is, but whatever I'll pick, I will make sure I will go in depth. And that's how when it came time for the placements and I met the Capital One team, I just really liked them. Like, these are just really cool people. And I decided that, okay, lending is something that will definitely stay, right? Long term, let me just learn that. And that's how I decided that, okay, I'll do lending long term. As soon as I got into Capital One, the first week I asked my VP, how much time does it take to learn lending? Right? Because I was like, 2-3 साल में सीख के आगे बढ़ेंगे, मतलब है ना? So he said 10 years. I said, why 10 years? Because you have to experience at least 2 cycles.
True.
So I said, okay, then I'm doing it this for 10 years.
बट यार इंजीनियरिंग में तो मतलब फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज ऑल ऑफ दैट लेंडिंग तो हम सीखते नहीं है.
Correct.
तो ये रियलाइजेशन कैसे आ गई कि मुझे लेंडिंग सीखना है?
Actually,
Just to complete, a lot of people's career get decided into two paths generally,
Right.
two ways
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
opinion. One is कभी कभी उनकी बढ़िया नौकरी लग जाती है
Correct.
and they realize यार ये तो बहुत मजा आ रहा है, इसी को
Correct.
करते हैं, and then they become really good at it.
Correct.
Or the other, which is a smaller percentage of people, generally have their own realization कि भाई नौकरी लगे ना लगे मुझे तो यही फील्ड करना है.
Right.
So either the field chooses you or you
Yeah.
choose the field.
Yeah.
What was that like for
I think
you?
it was close to the former, in a sense that I didn't know what Capital One was or anything.
वही मैं सोच रहा हूँ
हाँ.
कि इंजीनियरिंग में कैसे चमक गया कि भाई
नहीं.
लैंडिंग करना है.
ये नहीं था, बट मेरे क्राइटेरिया क्लियर थे. सो नाउ आई वांटेड टू डू समथिंग व्हिच आई कैन डू फॉर अ लॉन्ग टर्म. सो my criteria was it needs to be a need that will never go away, right? Like food will never go away, right? Water will never go away. Like this need will stay as human beings. So in my sense, lending was one of those things that will never go away. So it was a very fundamental aspect of economy, right? And it's a enabling aspect of economy. If you do right type of lending, you are creating capital.
True.
Which is furthering the extent of the economy. So therefore, I felt that this is something to actually look for. I didn't know all of this, but I knew that when I'm choosing, this is a thing that I can actually go after.
Cool, got it. So then you essentially sat in interviews, you liked
Yeah.
Capital One and all of those.
Correct.
Did you like participate with some other companies also, or otherwise like पहले बैठे मजा आया and then just
So
went?
actually the background story is because I was also in the placement committee. So I had interacted with all of these companies before. So I got a chance to meet their people beforehand. And I really liked the Capital One people, very no fuss type of people. The head of their UK business had come and he was just like chilling around in shorts in the campus. Versus the only other company I interviewed for was Lehman Brothers. And they were very fussy.
This was 2008.
This was 2008, just 1 year before the company came to an end. And I guess I was lucky because I really liked, and it was very very people driven decision that these people I really like, so I would like to work with them.
Got it. And then you went to, so did you just after your placement or completing your education, मतलब you went to Canada या फिर India में you had an
No,
office?
so they had a center in Bangalore, and actually that was a very cool setup. It was a 50 people office, and they just started the Canada division there. We worked there for almost year and a half, and then moved to Canada. Stayed there for a bit, and then basically 8 years I worked at Capital One, in which 7 years I worked for the Canada business.
Based out of Canada also.
Yeah, most of it based out of Canada.
And so why I'm asking this is also because to understand,
Yeah.
look, I've spent a decent time in financial services in India.
Yes.
You have also done that now.
Correct.
Obviously, मैं तो पूरा India रहा हूँ. You've
Sure.
gone there as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we are trying to learn or see, कुछ चीज़ें ऐसी भी होती है ना कि आप बेसिक सेकेंडरी रिसर्च से सीख जाते हो.
Correct.
है ना, आपको पता है कि यार ये हो चुका है. These are the metrics which have happened.
Correct.
If you do this A, B, then C happens.
Correct.
You know, it's like a process which you can observe at least.
Yes.
I understand कि India context अलग है, US context अलग है, China context अलग है.
Correct.
But having worked there
Yes.
and coming, you know, straight to lending, which is something which I wanted to explore with you, how is lending as an industry, or as Kunal calls it, lending as a feature,
Yeah.
how is this feature different or treated different in, say, United States, Canada, North American context, vis-a-vis an India context now that, you know, you have done a similar work at startups like Cred and now at Slice?
Yeah.
How is that different? Do you observe some differences first, and if so, then how is it different?
Yeah. So let me start by saying that the fundamentals are absolutely the same. So fundamentally, there is nothing different. The act of giving credit creates the risk, and then you try to figure out how to mitigate that risk, by various ways. So the drivers are exactly the same. The math is exactly the same, but there are very many differences also. So let's start with the first key difference is that the market there is a lot more mature compared to India. The credit penetration is much higher. What that leads to is that lends itself better to technology. It lends itself better to using ML based models, etc. to underwrite, versus when we start, like back in 2016, the penetration in India was very low. Credit bureau penetration was very low. Now it has come up. Now it is, I think now pretty much like we have a large part of India covered, thanks to MFI and startups, right? Those two have really changed the game. So one is penetration of credit, and therefore penetration of credit bureau, and therefore the possibility of using good underwriting models which allow you to underwrite at scale, right? And that enable the the product feature that we're talking about, that you can give loan in 30 seconds or 1 minute. That is not possible until you do it analytically, right? So that I think was a key difference, and now I think that gap has pretty much been bridged. The second key difference I would say is the consumer behavior. So because credit is a lot more penetrated in that market. So just to give you a sense, we used to watch this metric when I was in Capital One of retail lending divided by GDP of US, and it has crossed 100% a long time ago, right? So there is so much credit going around. That means that there is a certain amount of discipline, because everybody feels that it's important to maintain their credit score. That is already ingrained in the people there. So therefore, you don't see as much irresponsible behavior is still there, right? So you might, as a person, you might not understand your finances very well, and therefore you might tend to borrow where you don't have the capacity to pay for it. But you will usually not try to default intentionally. So the two axes of defaults that we usually talk about, right? The intent and ability. The intent part is much lower in the developed markets compared to in India.
Why is that?
It's that because people have had that cycle of consequence. So let's say I've given you credit, right? And you, like, maybe as a student, or maybe like when you just entered the country or something, and you've had one bad cycle, and now you're not, because credit score is also used by landlords to give you, for you to get a property on rent. right? Or will be used by employers also to check, whether you're a trustworthy person. So when people get to a bad score, it really hampers their life, right? In US. And when that cycle happens, right, another thing is, if you don't have a credit card in US, you will not have access to a lot of things, because it's so fundamental to the life in US that a lot of things you actually don't have any other medium to pay. You have to have a credit card. In US, if you are trying to book travel, there is almost no medium other than a credit card for you to pay, right? So therefore, that what US has done, or like what North America has done successfully, is made credit into a necessity, right? Having a credit card payment product, there is a necessity, and when something becomes a necessity, you treat it a lot more carefully, correct? So you will not, like, you will take that very seriously. I think that cycle India is going through right now. So in the last 7-8 years, I think the credit penetration has increased. And yes, there have been some people who have defaulted, and they will also go through that cycle of maturity where they will have some consequences, and then the general population will become more mature. So if you think about awareness today, on the credit score side, the awareness has already gone up.
नहीं, ये तो I agree, because
हाँ.
I can, while you were speaking, I can think of a time which is, say, made of 2000s,
Correct.
2005, 6, that time,
Hmm.
and I was employed with ICICI Bank, and obviously it was part of the risk control unit, which is like fraud control,
Correct.
and that too on the consumer asset side.
Correct.
और मुझे याद है यार, तब ना बहुत सारे लोगों का सिविल स्कोर ही नहीं होता था, which
Exactly.
is like आज तो बहुत सारे लोगों का, like I'm sure everybody knows, सब लोगों का खुद का सिविल लोगों को पता होता है. इतने
Correct.
सारे स्टार्टअप्स हैं या इकोसिस्टम्स आ गए हैं जो
Correct.
कि आपको बोलते हैं फ्री में क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक कर लो.
Hmm.
पहले तो लोगों को पहली बात पता नहीं होता था.
Correct.
दूसरा, इनको पता होता था, उनका बहुत बार -1 होता था क्योंकि क्रेडिट मिला नहीं है.
Correct.
हो सकता है कि आई यूज्ड टू लिव इन अ बबल, ऑल्दो आई स्टिल लिव इन अ बबल, मतलब, बट आई एम थिंकिंग मोर फ्रॉम कि बैंक का एक्सपीरियंस था तो मेरे को दिखता था. एंड बहुत सारे लोग, पीपल डिडंट केयर कि ठीक है,
Yeah.
हो गया, डिले हो गया, डिफॉल्ट हो गया.
Correct.
बट नाउ आई थिंक पीपल हैव रियलाइज्ड अ लॉट मोर कि यार, एक बार डिले या डिफॉल्ट कर दूंगा ना, तो मेरी जीवन में क्रेडिट की नेसेसिटी बंद नहीं हो जाएगी. दिस इज नॉट अ वन टाइम एक्सरसाइज आई एम डूइंग.
Correct.
ये होता रहना पड़ेगा.
Correct.
तो अगली बार मुझे लोन नहीं मिलेगा.
Exactly.
तो आई थिंक नाउ पीपल हैव बिकम मोर सीरियस, एंड दस आई थिंक जो हम बात भी करते हैं 200-250 मिलियन
Hmm.
सिविल में या ब्यूरो में एंट्रीज हैं इंडिया में,
Correct.
give or take, I think a lot of them have happened over last 10 years.
Exactly.
And that's where the cycle is new in India
Correct.
vis-a-vis North America, as you were saying. But when you're saying कि credit penetration बहुत ज़्यादा है,
Hmm.
look, penetration is also an outcome of, and as you explained, कि you had this really nice ratio which you used to think of,
Correct.
which by the way is intriguing, कि
Yeah.
retail lending कितनी हुई divided by GDP of the country.
Hmm.
I would love to understand why you thought of a ratio like that.
Yeah.
Not you, but say the company or
Sure,
whoever
sure.
you guys were working with.
Yeah.
But eventually lending करना is an outcome of underwriting people and all of that. People should also approach you कि मुझे lending चाहिए.
Correct.
इंडिया में भी हमेशा से क्रेडिट तो चल ही रहा था.
100%.
तो ऐसा तो नहीं है कि क्रेडिट इज न्यू.
Exactly.
Probably formal credit is new.
Hmm.
Informal credit तो इंडिया में हमेशा से था.
Correct.
So when you say कि credit की overall adoption has increased,
Hmm.
what do you exactly mean by that, and why did you guys think of this ratio of retail lending by GDP? मतलब ऐसे तो कोई भी दो A और B को पकड़ के डिवाइड कर सकता है ना.
Correct.
But
correct,
I'm
correct.
sure there is some method to madness. So
Yeah.
like really intrigued to understand these 2 points.
I think let me take the second question first. So I think, to be honest, there was an assumption that we had, right, that there is going to be some ceiling to lending. At that time, we honestly thought that there's going to be some ceiling to lending, no? Like, whatever the economy is producing, your lending cannot be more than that. Like, that is the assumption that we were operating in. So therefore, we were actually very scared in that time when this number was going from 90 to 100. We were like, every month we used to watch this, right? And we were just hoping, like, we were just waiting for some apocalyptic thing to happen, and it never happened. It never happened. So I think that is a big learning moment for me, that the macroeconomic element of it, right, which is US is creating so much liquidity, right, that this number pretty much has no cap anymore. So this number is actually more than, I think now it's about 130, 140 now in
Percent.
US, right? So it was really a false metric that you were chasing, right? But by the way, I think that can only happen in the US, right? Because US is also like their own like how much debt they have taken from the world is also at a just an unbelievable number right
And
now.
that's also like much more than the 100%
I don't
GDP
think
number.
anybody really understands how they're able to sustain, right? People have some explanations, but that is just from a first principle standpoint. I don't think anybody understands why that number is the way it is. Uh, that was the thought process part. The thought process was that as a percentage of GDP, there must be some cap. Must be some level after which this market will not grow.
So you guys started tracking it, then you
Yeah.
realized कि भाई इससे तो कुछ फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता.
अभी नहीं पड़ रहा है फर्क
हाँ.
और अभी भी देख रहे हैं उसको नंबर को ऐसा नहीं कि वी नॉट लाइक आई स्टिल लुक एट दैट नंबर राइट बिकॉज वी इन्वेस्टेड सो मच टाइम देयर आई स्टिल एम क्यूरियस टू सी व्हेन विल इट एंड there has to be some cap because the fundamental theory should hold right which is that as a percentage of GDP retail like lending should always be some percentage of GDP maybe it settles down at 200% but it should not be like endless so I'm still unraveling that mystery of why is it still growing. I have some theory, but I think maybe for another time. Now, on the other question which you asked, see, actually, credit predates money, right? Credit is actually how money gets created. It's not that money you lend, right? I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding that people have. Actually, when you lend money to somebody, that's how money gets created. Correct? So credit has been there forever. What I mean specifically in this context is formal lending, which creates a footprint on the bureau. So if I was to call it the Western model of lending, right, where there is a societal, like the society has come together to say, okay, there's going to be this one record that we'll keep as a society of who's not paying the banks, right? Or who's doing how well in the bank in terms of their repayments to the bank, and that will help other people, lend to them better, which is the credit bureau. That form of lending, that form of formal lending was sort of slightly lower, and now, as you correctly pointed out, that has really grown.
Awesome. So one of the other things also, sorry, just to complete this point, and
Yes.
probably
Yeah.
we'll just step to the next question.
Yeah.
With regulation, financial services,
Yes.
and we think about, whenever we think about a lot of different industries, regulations and financial services is one of the most strongest / robust
Yeah.
/ most defined.
Correct.
A lot of people have the aspiration of regulating some part of the economy, कुछ industry को कुछ करते हैं. At least financial services हर जगह अपने अपने level पे regulated है.
Correct.
वो regulation अच्छे हैं, बुरे हैं, strong है, weak है, वो अलग बात है. What are the differences you saw, say for example, now that you have a lot of things, obviously in India, RBI
Correct.
is like the guiding principle, they're the guiding light in terms of how financial services
Yeah.
ecosystem is done in India.
Correct.
Vis-a-vis Fed in US,
Yeah.
or Canada would be their central bank.
Sure.
Did you see some stark differences in how the regulators also approach lending?
Yeah, so I'll
Credit?
divide it into two aspects.
Okay.
So one aspect is in terms of substance, right? In terms of what the risks are and how they need to be regulated. I would say again the North American markets are ahead, right? So just to give you an example, there's a recent circular by RBI, draft circular on model risk management. Model risk management is something that the OCC has been regulating for almost 10 years. And it's the same fundamental principle, right? Which is you are making a decision basis these mathematical things. You please explain what have you assumed, right? That's the fundamental thing, and you make sure somebody else has checked that you're doing the right things. So that substance is there. Similarly, there's a regulation around key fact statement that is also there in the US and Canada with different names, and it's a very simple idea that you are selling a difficult product to consumer. You have to be transparent. You have to tell them exactly what are they signing up for. So the substance I think is very similar, and again, because the credit penetration is higher, the North American markets are ahead in terms of the substance of the regulation. But I think what is really good about the Indian markets is that RBI is a very, very good proactive regulator, right? And I think I'm really in awe of how great that organization is, right? In terms of understanding the see, at heart, I'm a risk manager, right? So I really appreciate when somebody is able to foresee and manage risks, right? And I think what RBI has done really well since 2016 is they have really been able to predict what the fault lines are and act on them before they become really big, right? And risk is all about counterfactuals. Risk is about what did not happen, right? So that is the aspect of RBI, and we can get into a few details also if you want to deep dive into it. But all of these things they were able to see beforehand, and they've been able to put controls in place before it became a huge problem. And I think that's a great position for us as a country, that we have such a proactive regulator, and it will guide us in the right direction.
Got it. Got
Yeah.
it. Awesome. Now this brings me to the broader question, which was something which we were talking about also, and something I wanted to explore with you is, of all the things every fintech does in the country, and I'm not specifically talking about India.
Yeah.
I'm really generalizing it. वो हम ये बात बोलते हैं ना कि at the end of the day every technology company would love to be a fintech.
Correct.
And when you talk about fintech, look, in the overall scheme of save, pay, lend and invest,
Correct.
the biggest revenue pools are lending.
Yeah.
और सबको lending करना है.
Correct.
Lending the holy grail of fintechs? And when I say that question, is every action a consumer is pushed to or they are taking voluntarily? Are all the funnels going to lending always?
It's a very good question. So I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is what is plausible, right? So I think if you look at the current market and if you look at where the profit pools lie, lending is an obvious opportunity, right? So you are seeing that the growth rate of lending sort of year on year, and if you're any company, if you're any fintech or any other technology company also, like if you're a media company also, you will see that you will gravitate towards profit pool. So one simple way of understanding this is what kind of ads are very popular. So you will see that in the era where the fantasy games were making a lot of money, right? Fantasy games were all the ads, correct? So if you went on TV, if you went on YouTube, like all your most of the ads you saw were of the fantasy ads.
Fantasy games.
Similarly, when EdTech was sort of very popular, it was making money. So every ad was of the EdTech, every ad that you saw was about an EdTech company, correct? So there's everybody who's trying to, like, everybody who's in business, right? And in technology business, they're at one level, they're looking at what is plausible right now. So if you listed down all the current opportunity, like what are all the markets, at what rate are they growing, and what is the margin that they're willing to pay to get a customer in, right? If you did that math, then lending will definitely come out top at this point in time in the market, right? And that, I think, that plausibility, right, the possibility of it making money is the reason why most companies are gravitating towards lending as a business.
Got it.
Right? But then the larger problem here is that actually this lending is ultimately fueling consumption, right? So therefore the consumption also has some cap, correct? So like if you're only doing this lending, that lending is leading to some consumption, and if that consumption is not for the right purposes, or if it's not commensurate with the actual paying capacity of the user, right, then this will also come to an end, correct? So therefore the lending has to be commensurate with the consumption capacity of this economy.
इसको थोड़ा deep में explain करो ना, मतलब I understand what you're saying.
Correct.
I can also relate to the fact that यार, if I am, मतलब just to break it into very very layman terms, if I am getting some credit and I'm not using it to generate more cash flows,
correct,
then obviously अभी तो लोन मिल गया, फिर वापस लोन नहीं मिलेगा because I'll not be able to repay.
correct,
But when you speak that from a economy lens,
correct,
are we saying whatever I just spoke, उसका culmination will ensure that you are credit cycles will not improve or go into a very bad cycle
Yeah.
where you will lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Is that the point you're trying
No,
to
no.
make?
I think that's why I made the point which I made earlier, which I think the good thing is that we have a strong regulator, right? So we have a strong regulator, and therefore, and to be honest, we have a lot of smart people, right? So I don't think that I'm saying something that people in the industry don't realize. And every lending institution has a risk department. Every risk department will have this exact same thought process. So it will, therefore, what I'm trying to say is that yes, today there is a lot of interest in lending, but I don't think that will sustain over a period of time. This will grow to a point, and then people will have to find another S curve. So the people will have to find some other opportunity. So this will probably stay as an opportunity for some time, and then people will have to find the next opportunity.
So you're saying कि अभी जो lending या fintech companies हैं,
Correct.
उन सब के लिए obviously outrightly बहुत बड़ा revenue pool जो exist करता है for
Correct.
them to do is lending, but
Yes.
this will also have a cap,
Correct.
and then eventually they will have to pivot to figure out something else.
Something else. Yes.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. What in your head could be these other avenues of making revenues? Like I understand कि जब आप पूरा saturation level पे आ जाओगे and you are
Correct.
forced to actually think of other ways of making money,
Yeah.
you will look at couple of other things, your margins will reduce. Ideally, it
Yeah.
should. And then you'll get into more transactional income which is getting generated. Trading could be one of that.
Correct.
You would, again, wealth management में जो आप mutual funds वगैरह करा रहे हो, all of that
Correct.
are very transactional relationships you'll get into with your
Correct.
customers.
Correct.
But in your head, once, and probably we can take, help from whatever more evolved
Yeah.
credit economies have shown.
Correct.
How do and what are those different products / features which
Yeah.
will make a lot of money for fintechs going forward
Yeah.
once you have lending as a product feature which has achieved its cap?
Yeah, I think the first actually deviation is currently people are very focused on retail lending, right?
Right.
I think the first deviation is from consumption capital to productive capital. So I think that is the shift which will happen right
which
now.
I think India में ज़्यादा हुआ नहीं है.
जो अभी हो नहीं रहा है, So if you look at the fintechs have been very focused, have a
B2C.
consumer DNA,
B2C.
have a consumer DNA, have been focused on retail consumers. If you go deep, actually from that also some money is going into businesses. If you go deep and you figure out like 20% is self-employed, right?
So effectively, money is a tool to take more options in life, and people are taking that money to actually do something where the money essentially goes to a business only.
Correct.
But I think वो business में it's helping them do a transaction of sale.
Yes.
But जो production है,
Correct.
वो वाली level पे credit नहीं पहुंचा है.
Correct.
And I think one of the things while you were speaking, I could also think of कि if we see, say, broader level for 50 years, how
Correct.
credit has evolved in US
Yeah.
or more developed economies also.
Yeah.
Everybody started innovation in B2C, then it went to B2B,
Correct.
which अभी तक हम उस लेवल पे पहुंचे ही नहीं है इंडिया में.
Correct.
इंडिया में B2C क्रेडिट इज इवॉल्विंग. अभी भी हम बोलेंगे तो भाई आपका टीयर 1 टीयर 2 में आई थिंक एनीबडी हु सिटिंग इन दिस रूम राइट नाउ वी विल बी बग्ड बाय द फैक्ट कि यार में 10 बार कॉल आते हैं.
Correct.
बट गो एंड टॉक टू अ कंज्यूमर
Yeah,
हु
yeah.
इज बेस्ड आउट ऑफ से टीयर 3 एंड बिलो, उनके पास एक भी कॉल नहीं आ रहा. सो देयर इज ऑब्वियसली अ बिग सेट ऑफ पीपल हु नॉट
Yes.
एक्सपोज्ड टू क्रेडिट अंटिल नाउ.
Yeah.
बट अभी भी हम B2B की बात नहीं कर रहे.
Correct.
B2B में तो अभी भी you have micro, medium, small, all of that.
Correct.
Large corporates, I think they get taken
Yeah,
care
yeah.
by your banks because
Correct.
that's where the wholesale banking happens.
Correct.
तो I completely agree कि B2B credit तो अभी touch भी नहीं हुआ है effectively इंडिया में.
Correct.
Because I was also talking to a friend of mine and couple of people. I have always been excited anyway
Yes.
on the MSME credit side.
Correct.
क्योंकि I always believe यार eventually politics and economics also work really hand in hand.
Correct.
मैं ये नहीं कह रहा किसका किसके कारण जन्म हो रहा है, like
Correct.
what is preceding the other.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, India has a lot of people, like the government will always be dependent on votes.
Correct.
Votes में बहुत सारी जनता MSME कर रही है इंडिया में.
Yeah,
लोग
yeah.
ज्यादा लोग
Largest-
सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयड हैं यार.
Largest employer. Correct.
मैं कह रहा हूँ ज्यादा लोग सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयड हैं इंडिया में.
Absolutely.
उनको आप क्रेडिट अभी नहीं दे पा रहे, अभी तो हम लोग एम्प्लॉयड जनता को दे रहे हैं.
Correct, correct.
बिकॉज हम एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं देते हैं
Correct.
तो फॉर्म में लिखवाते हैं अच्छा आप कौन सी कंपनी काम कर रहे हो,
Correct,
कैटेगरी A B है या नहीं.
Correct, correct,
वो तो
correct.
बहुत 1% of 1% जनता के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं.
Exactly. तो I think
तो वो होगा,
हाँ.
बट उसमें बहुत सारे प्रॉब्लम्स भी दिखते हैं मुझे.
Correct.
कोई फिनटेक उसमें पार्टिसिपेट अभी कर नहीं रही है.
हाँ.
What are your thoughts around
So
it?
I think that is exactly what is going to happen. So see, when the profit pool shifts, the companies will also shift. Like if you go back in time and if you ask a lot of these companies, is lending the business that you'll go after? They'll say no, right? Like some time ago it was ad tech, right? Ad was basically what everybody thought they were going to make their money on. Then ad profit pool shrink, people left that, right? People came to fintech. So I think that is the next frontier. I think is going to be serving the MSME, or I think MSME is a very broad term, but like generally serving finding users for productive capital. And what you'll realize basically when you get, so if you think about the consumer stack also, and why is it that the fintechs are able to make a dent, right? I think they provide beyond capital. There's other value that you provide, right? Capital is a commodity, so you have to think about what other value are you adding on top that this person is willing to take from you and not from somebody else. Correct? So the same thing I think will happen on the MSME side also, which is your capital. When the capital reaches, you realize that to make this capital productive, I have to give something else also. That I have to help this guy manage his inventory, right? I have to help him like procure items faster. I have to help him in marketing, right? Some of these other things will also, people will realize, okay, I need, and those things have to be done by technology. Those things will not be done just from pure capital.
And it's also to do with the fact that the point is, यार मतलब lending has to be a cross sell product primarily.
Correct.
क्योंकि अगर आप lending ही लेके जाओगे तो आप तो ऐसे सड़क पे खड़े हो जाओ और जनता को बांटना चालू कर दो.
Correct.
तो लेने तो आ जाएगी जनता,
Correct,
but you will
correct.
always attract adverse selection of the funnel which you will create.
Correct.
And thus lending should be a feature, is a feature, and should always be a cross sell product in my opinion.
Yeah.
तो जब क्रॉस सेल करने के लिए पहले फनल में लाने के लिए कुछ तो नया देना पड़ेगा ना.
Exactly.
And I think that's where a lot of people have not been able to figure out that
Correct.
what's the right product feature which you would want to offer to
Yeah.
say MSME as a cohort.
Correct.
MSME में मतलब I understand माइक्रो का बिहेवियर मीडियम से बहुत अलग है.
Correct.
But since it is termed together, I'm just
Yeah.
using that.
Yeah.
That has to be figured out, which
Yeah.
right now at least B2C context में people have figured out कि payments करा लो.
Correct.
या कुछ और जैसे हम क्रेडिट कार्ड पेमेंट्स हो गया, फोन पे इज डूइंग, UPI, Google Pay is doing it, but eventually you see a lot of them offering you some sort of a credit.
Correct.
In money, essentially we used to discuss, they have culmination of wealth, आप track कर सकते हो all of that, but eventually आपको एक WhatsApp आ ही जाता है ना कि 5 लाख का 10 लाख का प्री अप्रूव्ड लोन है, why don't you click and all of that.
Yeah.
But that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's it. So now when it's clear that that's where the profit pool is, then the technology, then people will go after that segment and like build the right technology. And when they do that, then it will make then that profit pool will move to more productive capital, right? So coming back to my original point, I think the fintech as we see today, which is very focused on retail lending, will probably move in the direction of more sort of business lending, SMB lending, MSME lending. That thing will happen because that's what the regulator is able to see and the industry is not able to see right now, right? Regulator is able to see that that's the right direction, like that is where you guys should be focused, and I think eventually the industry will also see that.
यार मुझे लगता है कि देखो इंडस्ट्री भी तो will go towards wherever you can make
Exactly.
You can make money. Look,
Correct.
You're not you're not trying to do it for the greater good of the society. At the end of the day, it's a capitalist ecosystem you're trying to build. You're trying for profit business.
Yeah.
वहाँ पे पैसा बन रहा है तो obviously you'll try and do it.
Correct.
अभी the uncertainty, the unavailability of data to underwrite better,
Yeah.
to actually build those processes which will make you say delta 4 better than somebody else or the incumbents who are giving credit.
Yeah.
उस लेवल पे तो अभी तक जनता को पता ही नहीं ना कैसे करना है वो सॉल्व.
Correct.
B2C में कम से कम वो पता है. In my opinion, I might be wrong. So I think that's how people will shift there, but that shift will predominantly happen only when people will start seeing
Correct.
कि यार ये भी सैचुरेट हो गया है.
हाँ.
सब लोगों को 25 बार कॉल आती है.
Correct.
While we were also discussing कि वो कॉलिंग भी बंद हो जाएगी अब काफी जल्दी.
Yeah.
Hopefully बंद हो जाए भाई.
Hopefully, हाँ.
The amount of spam calls I've been getting for the last 2-3 years, I don't know, for some reason is just increased multifold.
Yeah.
But then only they'll shift there.
Correct.
But that brings me to an important question. And by the way, since you've spent time in doing risk assessment, underwriting, you understand that really well. But now you're also heading, asset side business as well. Now, business is obviously an outcome of a lot of things you're trying to do. And even if we look or consider anything between B2C or B2B, if you're trying to build, say, a fintech in India,
Yeah.
you start with, and eventually with a view of building a credit business with them, lending.
Yeah.
You're trying to solve three problems. And ideally, what we were discussing of the three, if you can get all three right, then obviously great. One is
Correct.
distribution.
Correct.
Two is your ability to underwrite.
Correct.
And three is collection.
Correct.
कि मतलब बहुत सारे लोगों को आप कुछ दे रहे हो,
Correct.
आप उनको कितना दे रहे हो, because distribution is primarily how many people are your footfall,
Correct.
as we say, in your funnel.
Yeah.
And जब अंडरराइट कर रहे हो तो आप essentially दो चीजें चेक कर रहे हो, आप इंटेंट और कैपेबिलिटी चेक कर रहे हो, उसके बेसिस पे आप बता रहे हो अच्छा उसको इतना ही मुझे लोन देना है, वो इतने परसेंटेज पे दूंगा, एंड योर रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट इज ऑल्सो रिफ्लेक्टिव ऑफ द risk reward which I am having. The more risky a profile is, the higher the interest rate is. And lastly, आपने जितना पैसा दे दिया तो कैन यू रिकवर. इसमें जो 3 स्टेप्स हैं, नंबर 1 स्टेप इज मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट, उसके बाद ही स्टेप सेकंड आता है, स्टेप 3 कलेक्शन लास्ट में आता है. इफ वी जस्ट टेक सम टाइम एंड ट्राई एंड फिगर आउट, जब आप डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन क्रिएट कर रहे हो, in India when we think about fintechs, a lot of people have started looking at either very niche segment of customers or very broad segment of customers.
Correct.
बहुत broad करने के लिए आपके पास UPI वाले apps हैं, like the amount of people who are registered on say PhonePe, Google Pay is like crazy numbers.
Yeah.
And then obviously you have companies like Cred, you have companies like Slice, for example, you have companies like few other B2C apps where they are really targeting a very niche segment. How do you approach distribution or customer acquisition for that matter when you are targeting a niche customer segment in India while building a fintech product or a fintech itself? Like, what are the top 2-3 things people should keep in mind while building that? Or based on your experience, what have you observed?
Yeah, I think it really helps to start with a niche. It really helps because when you have a niche set of customers, then you can build something that is truly differentiated for them, right? The more you broaden the top of the funnel, right, the less you are playing on product differentiation. Correct. So if you go after everybody, you can do that. That's a perfectly valid strategy. Then that means you're actually playing on, either you're playing on capital, that you have like infinite runway and therefore you can spend a lot of money acquiring the users, or you're riding a wave, right, or a combination of both. So I would say PhonePe is in that second category, where I think they've built a fantastic product, and they were able to catch that UPI wave, and it's a fantastic product company, right? Product-led organization. But they had the confidence to say, okay, I'm going to build this, and it's going to be I can basically, in this domain of payments, I can draw out a minimum persona, right, in this entire audience. So I can figure out a set of needs that are consistent for this very, very large set of audience, right? And that is also possible because PhonePe and Google Pay is basically the first time then people are learning to make payments. So there is no precedent, right? So the product is teaching them how to make payments. So I think they really caught on to that UPI wave really well. And in any other time, I think that would have been very hard, right? The equivalent is YouTube as well, right? Like YouTube, basically people learned how to look at videos through YouTube, right? The mic feature of YouTube, like searching through voice, is the most popular in India because people don't know how to write. So they're able to do that here, and they've caught on that vibe of digital adoption in India, and that's why they've gotten this distribution. But that, I think that is a timing strategy. So if you got the timing right, then you can do something like this. If people already have established behaviors and you're trying to differentiate basis your product offering, right, then it's actually really hard to build for the entire set,
Masses,
for
right.
the masses at the same time. So you have to pick some niche in which what you offer is truly differentiated, right? and then you go about figuring out what is a unsaid problem, what is something that is actually a problem or actually a need for that consumer, that but nobody's talking about it, right? And I think both these companies have done that well. I would like to refrain from going into more details,
नहीं ठीक है.
but like if you were to take like a different example, like SoFi is a good example, right? SoFi in the US went after students. So if you think about students, students are a very small market, right? By definition, your market is churning, right? You're not student for a long time, but they were able to go after that market and really build a strong product targeted on students, which allowed them to scale into so many categories over a period of time. So I think niche is a very very good way of getting into a segment and truly building something differentiated for that segment.
And I think that's how your brand can also get
Yeah.
established well, and then once your brand is there, then you can actually jump into multiple things.
Correct.
But if you are everywhere to begin with,
Yes.
then nobody can associate ki is this product or service for me,
Correct.
and that becomes a very hard sell for a lot of people. Would that be like a good understanding?
Yeah,
of
I think
that?
that's a good, like basically a brand that resonates with you.
Right.
Right, like so to create that resonance, you have to pick who your audience is, and the better you pick your audience, the higher chance of something sticking. Once you have landed, then obviously you can go in all directions. Then it's your choice. See, if you the audience that you picked has depth, right? So they have more than enough things to do with you. Then you go deep, right? Then you just do more and more and more. So versus if your audience doesn't have depth, then you go breadth, right? Then you go after the adjacent market, then you go after the adjacent market after that, and so on, right? And there are, like, if you look at the Indian economy as a whole, and if you look at conglomerates, India overall is a shallow market. So therefore, if you look at the biggest companies in India, they are conglomerates. They're the same holding company which are building 10 different businesses, right? And that's a bread strategy, right? Because the market itself is shallow. No one business is going to become a very very large business, right? Focusing on India market alone. So therefore, you build one business, then you build another business adjacent to that, then you build another business adjacent to that, and that's how you make it into a very very large company, right? So versus if you look at in the US, like you will see one company that is doing one small thing and has so much depth, right? Databricks is an example. Just doing databases. Just doing it. And just in databases, I think there are probably like 50 companies, correct? So I think that is the way. But every time you should start with a small audience. You should make sure that you have a product that really works with them, and you have the right retention in that product. You have a product that resonates with that audience. Once you are able to establish that, then you assess whether it's a deep enough market. If it is a deep enough market, then you go build a lot of depth in that market. If it's not a deep enough market, then you look for adjacencies and build sort of more horizontally.
But Kunal, एक बात बताना कि जब when you are selecting that niche audience,
Correct.
is that an outcome of who you can lend?
Yeah.
And thus I will select इन लोगों का problem solve करना है,
अच्छा, right.
या फिर मैं पहले, क्योंकि प्रॉब्लम सबको है.
Correct.
अब वो ये गरीब आदमी की प्रॉब्लम कोई सॉल्व नहीं करना चाह रहा,
Right.
क्योंकि मैं क्रॉस सेल क्या करूंगा. एंड आई एम बीइंग वेरी ऑनेस्ट
Yes,
है.
yes, yes.
अमीर आदमी को एक्चुअली कोई प्रॉब्लम है नहीं,
हाँ.
होगी भी तो हम सोच रहे हैं कि अरे इसको पता नहीं है ये प्रॉब्लम है, मुझे
Correct.
पता है कि इसको प्रॉब्लम होगी.
Correct.
इट्स द सेम ऊबर एग्जांपल वी गिव
Yes,
ना,
yes, yes.
कि हम तो हाथ रोक के काली पीली रोक लेते थे,
सही बात है.
पर अब हमें पता है कि भाई इनको आगे जाके समझ में आएगा कि अब काली पीली रोक नहीं पाएंगे क्योंकि उबर की आदत हो गई.
Correct.
बट वो भी आप एक अमीर आदमी को बेच रहे थे. इवेंचुअली इट गॉट डेमोक्रेटाइज्ड टू अ लेवल वेयर नाउ यू हैव those kind of vehicles which are offered to people.
Correct.
So that the middle class can also use it.
Correct.
But the question I have is, and this is like a very strong understanding I have कि भाई lending ही सब कुछ है. कि आप lending के basis पे niche define कर रहे हो और फिर उनकी problems सोच के solution ला रहे हो, या आप कोई भी niche पकड़ के उसका solution बना रहे हो और फिर देख रहे हो कि अच्छा lending कर सकते हैं कि नहीं कर सकते. How should one go about it? Because मुझे तो यार यही दिखता है कि लोग बोलते हैं lending है. अच्छा lending किसको करना है? Everybody keeps talking about those three India, Bharat 1, Bharat 2, Bharat 3.
Correct.
Bharat 1 everybody wants to sell it, sell to. तो अब हम सिर्फ let's focus on top 2%, top 5%, top 10% let's say. और फिर हम उनकी प्रॉब्लम्स देखते हैं, उनको लाइफ में क्या क्या प्रॉब्लम है, और हम फिर प्रोडक्ट बनाते हैं. बट यार प्रोडक्ट प्रॉब्लम्स कैन बी सॉल्व एनीवेयर. तो फर्स्ट ही चल रहा होता है, सेकंड भी चलेगा क्या? सेकंड से कि मतलब जस्ट पिक प्रॉब्लम्स एंड सॉल्व, वेयर यू नो लेंडिंग हो पाए ना हो पाए, यू नेवर नो.
नहीं, आई डोंट थिंक सेकंड चलेगा. सो लेट मी क्वालिफाई दिस. सो द वे आई थिंक अबाउट दिस इज यू हैव टू थिंक अबाउट द मार्केट, right? And you have to see, now you have two options. Either you look at a market that is underserved, correct? So you look at what is the penetration in this market of, let's say, credit, and then either you pick a market which is underserved. If you're picking that market, then you have to really figure out, underwriting becomes very, very important, right? Underwriting becomes really important, that from the day one you build a product that will allow you to underwrite better longer term, correct? Because if it's underserved, there's a reason why it's underserved.
वही मैं बोलने लगा था कि
Correct.
मतलब there is a reason why somebody is
Why somebody is underserved,
ऐसे तो
right?
क्रेडिट अच्छा बना सकते हो पूल, तो why will I not build that business?
Correct. तो आप underserved अगर पकड़ रहे हो तो then you have to make sure that whatever product you are building ultimately will lead you to having some advantage in lending to that segment.
फिर तो यार B2B में पेमेंट प्रोडक्ट तो बनना ही चाहिए फिर. नहीं,
Correct.
अकाउंट पेबल रिसीवेबल सब जनता कर रही है,
हाँ.
SaaS में बनाती है.
Yeah.
But if you can track people's payable receivable really better
Yeah.
and be part of that ecosystem, then your ability to underwrite will be much harder.
Should
much
be.
higher. Na?
Should be.
मतलब just a small
Yeah. Should be.
tangential point. Sorry. हाँ, please continue.
So I think so that is one way, which is you figure out a part of the market which is underserved and you build a product that will ultimately help you underwrite, right? That customer. The other strategy is to find a segment which is overserved, right? And it's very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But you know, wherever there is a market and people are getting overserved, there's a reason for that. Right? There's always a reason. One of the biggest mistakes people make is to go after things where you need to build a market. It's almost impossible to build a market, right? Very, very few people in this world are capable of building new markets. So it's always a good idea to go after a market which is already established. And in that overserved market, figure out how you can add value, right? And that will mean that, okay, maybe you will not win on underwriting, right? Maybe you should win on distribution. Like you basically break down that market further and see where is that, what is that angle through which you can enter the market.
Which is what fintechs have done, ना?
Yeah, correct.
क्योंकि ऐसा तो कुछ नहीं है कि जो fintechs कर रहे हो बैंक नहीं कर सकती थी. मोटा मतलब हो सकता है यार, दो चार लोग बोले यार नहीं ये चार चीजें कर सकते थे. I'm just saying ब्रॉडर लेवल पे तो अंडरराइटिंग, और आप जब अंडरराइटिंग कर रहे होते हो तो आप इफेक्टिवली एक आरई पे डिपेंडेंट होते हो, एक रेगुलेटेड एंटिटी पे डिपेंडेंट होते हो.
करेक्ट.
तो मतलब फिनटेक्स ने तो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ही सॉल्व किया है ना
इफेक्टिवली. एब्सोल्युटली डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ही सॉल्व किया है. तो वो है. तो मतलब आई थिंक व्हेन यू आर going after an overserved market, and if you build a distribution first product, you have a right to enter. You have to do a lot of other things also to win that market, but you definitely get an entry. So if you look at the lending industry, मतलब एक बार fintech को side में कर दो, and if you just look at the lending industry as it existed, there's still a very, very solid DSA business, right? So even still exists, right? So that if you just take that, already in banking, an existing practice is that somebody will acquire this lead for me and give me, right, a qualified lead on which I will lend. So that business by anyways exists, right? So if you just focus on that and you figure out, okay, today the channels are, you know, sending this person to some office to get like leads of all the employees, or sending them to sit in, you know, to create a kiosk and sit in a mall. If we can replace that offline distribution with some online distribution, then that itself is a great business to be.
Got it.
So just to summarize, basically, if you are going after the overserved segment, you have to index more on the distribution. If you're going after the underserved segment, you have to still think distribution, but you have to index more on the underwriting piece of it.
Or the product or service which you're offering them.
Exactly.
Which is primarily solving for a problem which nobody else was solving for them.
Correct.
So one of the things which, you know, now that we have established कि यार lending is like the very core, you know, central pillar to how do you build profitability.
Correct.
In fintechs, and I'm not saying fintechs are all startups, like anybody in the financial ecosystem.
Sure.
Given that, you know, how we have evolved. say 2014 पकड़ लेते हैं, although you were speaking
Sure.
about 2016, 2014, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
the way people used to offer credit
Correct.
was very push based. कॉल कर रही है जनता,
Correct.
या फिर आप बैंक जाते हो
Correct.
और जनरली आपको कुछ ऑफर चाहिए तो बैंक का ऑफर है.
Correct.
By the way, banks have also evolved to a level where a
Yeah.
lot more people are getting pre-approved rather than pre-qualified.
Correct.
But अब क्या हो रहा है कि आपके fintechs भी हैं.
Correct.
They are bringing you in a funnel where a cross sell is happening on a screen primarily.
Correct.
पहले फोन से होता था, documentation होता था. How do you, given that your ability to underwrite has also evolved because
Correct.
of the digital footprint now, it has
Yeah.
been created for a lot of people in B2C at least
Correct.
in last 10 years. How do you think, at least let's stick to B2C,
Yeah.
this will evolve in next 5-10 years?
Yeah. So I think my central thesis on this is that nobody really wants credit, right? Credit is not something that people are like excited about. People want something that they're excited about, and credit is an enabler of that.
Means to an end.
Yeah, means to an end, right? So I wanted to buy this like really nice home, which is out of my budget. So therefore, I took a home loan. I really wanted to go study in the US, but it was out of my reach. So therefore, I took an educational loan, right? My aspiration was a better life. Education was the means to that, and to means to education was credit. So right now, in a supply constrained market, right, where the supply is the issue, the supplier will decide when you get something, right? So if you think back to the like license Raj, like people used to wait for Bajaj scooters for long periods of time, but when you look at it right now, it's basically available on tap. You can go, you can, like, I think with some of the latest scooters, you can actually just order them online. I think the same thing will happen to credit also. When the supply is sufficient, then whenever you are getting the thing that you aspire to get, you will get credit with it. So if you look at the more mature parts of the ecosystem, right, cars is like that today, right? When you go, you buy a car, the dealer will give you financing with it, right? Most of the high ticket purchases are sort of like that, that if you go, consumer durable financing is there. So if you look at all the other areas where credit is not available at the point of need, I think that is going to change. And that is going to and now when you start thinking about that deeper, that will again mean that as new points of commerce evolve, the credit will evolve with it. So as more people start to, let's say, spend on preventative healthcare, right, the credit will evolve, go there. Like people, I can 100% see that people will take credit for, let's say, going to a gym, right, signing up for a gym, because the gym is genuinely something that will make them more productive. I can see that happening. I think it will happen in a few years. Like if you look at that arc today, we've gotten from a place where being fat was a status symbol to now, right? Like there was a time when if you're healthy, people used to say you're healthy, right? I think I'm still in that
मैं भी हूँ. Wealth management बोलते थे ना
yes,
लोग.
but to now, a lot of people want to be healthy, right? So being
That is
healthy is a status symbol. So now that it is a status symbol, people will go beyond their means also to achieve that status. So therefore, you will see penetration of credit in that space, right? I think that all the categories of consumption which are going to grow will take credit with them.
So does that mean, obviously one is use case.
Yes.
कि जिस use case, look, effectively money is just a tool to
Correct.
exercise the option of using that or getting
Yes.
that product or service.
Correct.
Wherever something a consumer is trying to buy,
Yes.
because of status, need, whatever,
Yeah.
you either had credit
Correct.
or you didn't have credit. Wherever credit didn't exist, and obviously
Yeah.
status makes it more real and
Correct.
people try to crave for it, you will start having credit as a feature there.
Correct.
But does that also mean that the credit card penetration in India will also substantially go up, given that we are very, very poor in credit card penetration?
Yeah.
If you compare to say US or China,
Correct.
We are what, at 3-4%, give or take, and ideally these places have just multiple fold better than us.
Yeah, I think definitely credit card penetration will go up, but you have to remember that credit card spend is still a very small spend. like the average bill amount on a credit card is like less than 20,000 rupees.
True.
Right. So still, I am talking about even larger purchases. So I'm talking about the whole category of purchases which is happening right now in the nascency, and that will grow. So that is, I think, one dimension, which is as the supply of capital increases.
बट क्योंकि एक बात बता ना, इंडिया में जब क्रेडिट से बुक साइकिल बुक जो बनेगा,
करेक्ट
वो स्मॉल अमाउंट्स डन मल्टीपल टाइम्स क्रेडिट में बनेगा,
हाँ.
या बड़े अमाउंट्स डन लेस नंबर ऑफ टाइम से बनेगा?
दोनों बनेगा.
हाँ, मतलब ज्यादा क्या बनेगा? बिकॉज आई जस्ट थिंक कि सिंस इंडिया इज नॉट अ वेरी रिच कंट्री, सिंस आवर पर कैपिटा जीडीपी इज नॉट रियली थ्रू द रूफ,
करेक्ट.
you will always, predominantly have.
The latter is more needed. So again, tying it back to the consumption point, if most people are spending that small amount of money and sort of rotating that, then obviously that will also get served through credit, right? So that will definitely happen.
And thus you will have India may retail lending over GDP number go up.
Correct. That will happen. So this is one dimension, right? Which is the, like, if you were to simplify it, it's point of sale. Essentially, wherever the point of sale is there, lending will happen there. The second dimension, I think, which is very important, is I think fundamental job of technology is to reduce cost.
Right.
So what technology will do is that it will enable us to underwrite much more cheaply, and therefore everywhere where it's prohibitive to lend because the cost is very high, the cost of distribution is very high, the cost of acquisition is very high. All those will now come in the purview. It's already happening, right? All the short-term loans are sort of examples of that. But you can even take it to the next layer. So in agricultural lending also, or in microfinance lending also, the same problem appears, right? Which is, let's say in microfinance, you have to get a full group together, right? And then you have to have them sort of come on a regular basis. You have to send somebody who will sit with these people, right? Conduct these meetings. So the cost is high.
The SHG lending.
The SHG, the GLG and SHG lending type thing, right? So that is also quite costly. So I think that all of that, as the digital penetration goes up, the cost of underwriting will come down, and therefore a lot of that will become much more possible to do, right? The third, and I think a very, very important piece, today, one of the reasons that, personal loan is growing a lot more than some of the other uses, right? Like ideally you would want to know what the money is being used for.
Agree.
Correct. But personal loan, the reason it's growing is basically it's very hard to track end use, right? It's very hard. Basically, you're tracking declaration of something. Because let's say I took money from you, and I went to, let's say, buy a machine, right? Buy a small machine. I bought a sewing machine. I have a tailoring business, right? It's hard for you to track that full case because that person who's selling me the machine is not willing to sell it on a credit card, right? But what will happen is that as more of the transactions get digitized, these assets tracking will also happen. So the small ones, and this is your question about small and versus large, I think the B2B payments landscape will evolve, and therefore some of these large assets we will be able to track them digitally, and therefore hypothecate them digitally, and that will evolve the really large ticket size loans also.
Makes sense.
I can basically imagine a world in which you're buying a machine of, let's say, 50 lakhs or 1 crore, right? And I have the equivalent of a credit bureau, right? Wherein this asset is belong to you, but if I've given you a loan, it's lien to me. And it's very easy, just like that coverage is there in credit bureaus. It will be very easy for everybody else to see that this asset belongs to you, is liened basically, right? And belongs to a bank. And that will really allow us to unlock the assets that we have. So a lot of the assets today that we have are not being used productively. Land is not being used productively, right? Property is not being used productively. These are like essentially dead assets. So I think the easiest way to understand it, वो बोलते हैं ना कि the future is already here, just in small pockets. So the easiest way to understand this is loan against securities, right? So if you take a loan against a security, essentially the market already exists, correct? and it's possible to basically take a loan against a mutual fund that you own or a stock that you own, as long as it's like substantially liquid, and you basically get an API through which a bank can take a lien on the security itself. So you, as the holder of the asset, can actually create leverage on that asset, right? You can say that yes, मेरा 100 रुपए का stock है, मेरे को बेचना ही नहीं है, I don't want to sell it for the next, let's say, 5 years, but on the basis of that I can take, let's say, a 50 rupees loan, and I can use that for some other activity, some other productive activity, right? So this ecosystem of you having an asset which has a liquid market, and the ownership of the asset is very clear. So anybody can any other interested party can very easily verify who does this asset belong to. So you don't have the ability to, like, sell the asset twice or lien the asset twice. And at the same time, if, let's say, I, as the person who has taken over the asset, I have the ability to sell it if you don't pay, then that creates a very equitable relationship, right? And that really unlocks the market. So tomorrow, imagine if we had a similar thing in property as well, that all properties are listed and the property rates are pretty much like clear, and I know whether Siddharth owns this particular house or this particular land, and therefore when you lean that house, you are freeing up capital for yourself, right? Because you have a lot of your worth just tied into that asset.
True.
So if I can lend against that asset, my risk is covered, right? If I lend to you because it's a secured asset, if I lend to you at 8% or 9%, and you can use that capital to do something which can lead you to 12% or 13% yield, I am green, you're green, correct? I think that's going to be a great thing.
I think this is a great point,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of problem is also, and when you were speaking about कि जनता personal loan ही क्यों ले रही है?
Correct.
Because one of the questions I also had was कि यार, even if we are right now evolving, जहाँ B2C बहुत ज़्यादा evolved है, B2B नहीं है.
Correct.
B2C में भी सब personal loan ही कर रहे हैं.
Correct.
But ऐसा नहीं है कि मैं personal loan करना चाह रहा हूँ as a fintech.
Yeah.
The consumer is also wanting personal loan because eventually they just want to get away from the hassle of कि भाई मेरे को जो करना है मुझे करने दो, पैसे दे दो.
Correct.
But and a lot of people are not able to do, say, more secured asset book creation.
Correct.
Also because मैं hypothecation ढंग से नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ.
Correct.
आप कार का कर पा रहे हो, आप लैंड का कर पा रहे हो, आप घर का कर पा रहे हो, एक प्लांट का कर पा रहे हो.
Correct.
बट ऐसा नहीं है ना यार, ये 3-4 चीजें ही खरीद रहा हूँ.
Correct.
Ongoing basis पे, even it, B2C, B2B even more.
Correct.
मैं 50 तरीके की चीजें खरीद रहा हूँ.
Correct.
The ability to hypothecate a lot of my transactions,
Yeah.
irrespective of that asset which I bought being an appreciating or a depreciating asset.
Correct.
क्योंकि कार में depreciating में भी तो दे ही रहे हो.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Will ensure that the credit giving ability will
Yes.
go multifold.
Exactly.
Which right now as an economy, I think as an ecosystem worldwide,
Correct.
is not been really well solved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
That's
think
a great tech problem to solve, I think.
I absolutely.
If you can have a central function of solving, एक चीज solve कर दो भाई.
Correct.
You just become the source of truth.
Correct.
कि ये चीज इसको belong करती है. Like ये पेन है.
Correct.
अब ये पेन मेरा टूट गया अगर मोबाइल में, तो मुझे खरीदना ही पड़ेगा.
Correct.
अब यार हो सकता है ये महंगा पेन हो,
सही बात
पर
है.
अब आप मेरे को इस बात का लोन तो दे नहीं रहे हो.
सही बात है.
सो देयर आर 2 ways of giving loan. या तो कंज्यूमर, जब ये कंज्यूमर ड्यूरेबल मतलब लोन लूंगा तो आप उसके लिए दोगे,
Correct.
तो हाइपोथिकेट हो जाए तो इवन बेटर है.
Correct.
और या तो आप मुझे पेमेंट को स्प्लिट करने का मौका दोगे, जो मैं इंस्ट्रूमेंट यूज कर रहा हूँ,
Correct.
जहाँ क्रेडिट कार्ड आ जाता है. बट क्रेडिट कार्ड 3% लोगों के पास ही है,
Correct.
तो ये चीज वैसे भी कम ही लोग खरीद पाएंगे.
Correct.
पर क्रेडिट कार्ड ना भी बढ़े, बट आप इसको हाइपोथिकेट कर सकते हो. यू कैन फिगर आउट हु आई एम, देन हो सकता है 3% के जो 30% इंडिया की जनता ये फोन या ये चीजें खरीद पाए.
Correct.
Thus consumption going higher and higher. So I think I really liked your idea on hypothecation and how that has not been solved, and thus a lot of people are offering personal loan.
Correct.
Because a lot of people want personal loan.
Exactly.
And thus we keep also speaking about na ki personal loan, although is a shame product,
Correct.
but every 4 and 5 people you know around you, mostly give or take, have some sort of a personal loan running.
Correct.
It's just that people are not talking about it, क्योंकि भाई उनकी कोई और need है जो नहीं पूरी fulfill.
Correct.
Makes sense. One thing, sorry.
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
No, I just want to clarify this a little bit more. So I think what will be really helpful is if we are able to achieve that chain, right? So basically, hypothecation of asset is one part, correct? Second is creating liquidity for asset. That is the second. So
True.
having a market to create a liquidity for that asset, and the key insight that I would want you to take away from this is when see what people a lot of people say, why do you want to give only secured loans, give unsecured loans, right? But if you think about it, when I have something of yours hypothecated, now we are on a level playing field. Now we're equitable.
True.
Right? You have something of mine, I have something of yours. Right? So then your responsibility towards me is also equitable. In an unsecured loan, once I've given you a loan, right, I have a lot more hanging on it than you do. Correct? So I think this, when you do that, by definition, it also makes you more responsible. So it makes you more responsible about your capital, and therefore it's much more likely that you will use that capital in a more responsible way, in a more productive way.
And also, I was thinking,
Yeah.
given that we are at a give or take repo of say 6.5% right
Correct.
now, eventually over time you would expect this number to come down.
Correct.
That means obviously the cost of capital is lower,
Yeah.
the availability of credit will go up, consumption will go up. If you can actually do what we just discussed,
Correct.
the adoption of credit will also go up.
Yes.
If you have the steps you spoke
The
about
value chain,
if the value chain is developed clearly,
Correct.
the adoption of credit by the overall ecosystem will be much higher.
Yes. And it will be all lower risk.
हाँ मतलब वही
हाँ.
मैं कह रहा हूँ मतलब एज अ फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन
Yes.
में बनाऊंगा भी तब ना बिगर बुक यार
Correct.
क्योंकि क्या है ना ऐसा नहीं है कि आज 6% है तो कल को 16% होगा तो आप
बात
बोलोगे 10% मार्जिन में मैं 26% या look obviously there is a reason why books do not get created at an IRR of 50%.
Correct.
Because there is an upper cap to when the entire book will have a run fall off.
Correct.
आप ऊपर नहीं जा सकते आप नीचे की तरफ आ सकते हो
सही बात
और जितना आप नीचे आ रहे हो उतना आप एक्चुअली तभी कॉन्फिडेंटली नीचे आ सकते हो व्हेन कंजम्पशन हो रहा है एंड यूज पता है
Correct.
कि डिफॉल्ट नहीं हो रहा है
Correct.
ऑल ऑफ दैट विल इसेंशियली कम टुगेदर
Correct.
टू डेवलप द वेरी prosperous credit ecosystem.
Exactly.
That's the thing which I could gauge from what you just said.
Correct. Exactly right.
But coming to like the couple of final thoughts,
Sure.
before we call this off. Look, you've been doing underwriting also.
Yes.
You've done that.
Yeah.
We have discussed how it was, it is, and what it will be. And given that a lot of digital footprint has been created in the last 10-15 years, I'm sure, look, you have give or take similar age. I'm sure you remember times of Orkut and before.
Of course.
Most people would not even know that.
Yeah.
And post Facebook, obviously the amount of digital footprint which has been created is great.
Yeah.
Or next 10 years will be much, much more than what your last 10 years were. AI has become more real.
Correct.
Underwriting, how it used to happen, now it happens, is very different.
Yeah.
How do you think AI will play? I'm sure it will play a bigger role.
Yeah.
How do you think it will play a substantial role in underwriting? Because जो हमने तीन चीजें डिस्कस करी, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, अंडरराइटिंग और कलेक्शन.
Correct.
I think collection is a separate problem to solve. Distribution is a very different problem to solve. Underwriting में तो AI real है यार.
Correct.
How do you see both of them working together
Yeah.
for the benefit of, say, financial institution
Yeah.
as well as the consumer?
So, if you think about the fundamental problem of underwriting,
Okay.
the fundamental problem of underwriting is I will either get to know some things about you or I will ask you a few questions about yourself. And from that entire piece of information, I will decide whether I like you or not, whether I trust you or not. That's the fundamental problem of underwriting, right? Now, the form factor through which we have been interacting with the world, in the offline world, it was a form, like literally a form, right? So you can ask so many questions. When we moved to digital also, it was partially form, partially like, the data I can get from bureaus, etc. And then the last part was some footprint that you have on like your behaviors on, let's say, some apps, things like that, right? So your digital footprint, if you will. But still, I was just observing a bunch of things about you, and basis that I was able to come to some conclusion, correct? Versus a person who's underwriting, right? So this is like your digital world. So like basically if you take one category of underwriting wherein the underwriter is not talking to you, right? So there the mode of interaction is basically through a third party, which is a dumb third party, correct? So basically either you are asking to fill a form, you are filling that form, I'm getting some information, or in the more evolved version, which is the version phase 2, which is where we are right now, where I'm getting some information centrally, I'm asking you a few questions, and third, I'm seeing your behavior on some digital things that you are doing, whether like what kind of things are you buying, what kind of apps you're using, etc., etc. This versus the like golden sort of standard of underwriting is somebody sitting across from you and asking you questions, right, and trying to understand what kind of a person you are, correct? That is how underwriting is done. If you think about corporate underwriting, for example,
Even very small ticket, no bureau underwriting is also done
is
like
done
that.
that way, right?
STPL जो एक product होता था small
Correct.
ticket personal loan में वो credit manager used to do an interview.
Exactly, right? You used to go. I think that can happen now. So that is a fundamental shift that can happen. So now when you are collecting information from somebody, you're not wedded to the form factor of a form or like 5 things you have to fill. You can have a conversation, and you can have that conversation through an AI, right?
I think more broader way what you're saying, if I may,
Yeah,
you're in underwriting, since you agreed that there are two primary things you're trying to check, capability and intent.
correct.
Capability तो आप बहुत तरीके से चेक कर सकते हो. अभी AA भी आ गया है,
Correct.
अकाउंट एग्रीगेटर फ्रेमवर्क आ गया है,
हाँ.
बहुत सारा डेटा मिल रहा है, आप कैपेबिलिटी मोटा मोटा चेक कर सकते हो. इंटेंट के बहुत कम इंडिकेटर्स हैं. जब आप मुझसे बात कर रहे हो तो आप इंटेंट चेक कर सकते हो ना थोड़ा सा. आई थिंक दैट विल इवॉल्व. Is that a fair thing to say?
No, I think that's a sort of simplistic understanding.
I agree. I'm just trying to make it simplistic.
Yes. So yes, that is true. But I think even on the capability side, right, all of this information is partial information. So just say like if you go through account aggregator also, I think on surface it looks like you can get all information. But like people have multiple accounts, right? Whether they will give you consent for all accounts or not, whether you're able to fetch the right account information or not, right? You might have chosen not to put money in the account. You might have a relationship with your family and that papa manage karte hain paisa mera, right? So there are all these like complexity of a person's life that does not get captured in their financial statements, right? So financial statements will always give you a small fraction. You can make an assessment basis that, right? You always will. But the
वो अंडरराइटिंग में भी तो अपन डिस्काउंट तो करते ही है ना कि हमें पूरा इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं पता.
तो मैं ये कहाँ बोल रहा हूँ कि अंडरराइटिंग नहीं कर सकते. अंडरराइटिंग कर सकते हैं.
मैं कह रहा हूँ वो और इवॉल्व होता जाएगा.
Exactly. So अब यहाँ पे the real sort of leap that we can make is that we can truly customize underwriting versus every person. Right? We can ask whatever questions we want to ask, right? Basis who you are. जो पहले कभी नहीं था. आपको किसी ना किसी लेवल पे तो आपको फिट करना पड़ता था ना. Like आप पहले 10 क्वेश्चन में फिट करते थे पर 20
में एग्री. वो एक मॉडल बन जाता था, आप उसमें ही फिट करते थे, देखते थे भाई रिजेक्ट एक्सेप्ट है क्या, और एक्सेप्ट है तो फिर
सैलरीड है, सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयड है,
राइट. दोस आर एल्गोस यू आर बिल्डिंग.
करेक्ट.
द एआई विल देन अलाउ यू टू एक्चुअली हैव मोर डायनामिक assessments or underwritings to be done.
Yeah, very personalized. Like you can go into, like you can ask the exact right question for that person depending on their previous answer, which you were not able to do till now. I think that's going to completely change the way that we underwrite, because the other aspect of this is you'll hear a lot about when we talk about underwriting, and especially when we talk about machine-based underwriting. I used to be, and I still am, of this school of thought that you have to be able to explain why you made the decision, because ultimately it's a important decision that you're making, right? Somebody is in need for money. It is just your job to give money and you're not giving. So then you have to be able to explain, why did I decide to give this person a money? And therefore, when we build models also, we try to only use variables that we can actually explain. In AI, the biggest problem that we had so far, or the biggest argument against using more sort of deeper machine learning has been that you can't explain the variables because it's a black box, and it takes everything and you really can't explain what is going in, what is going on. So that is what makes a lot of people uncomfortable, right? I don't know how this thing is making a decision. right? I think that is the next piece of problem to solve, because it's very clear that the value is there, and if you use AI, you will make better decisions. So now you work on top of that and you try to figure out how to make this explainable. And I think this is actually a personal transition I went through, because what happened was, when we did underwriting and we built models, we were able to say, yes, this looks like an explainable variable, so I am okay keeping it. If it's not explainable, I'll keep it out. But when I was doing my startup, I actually worked with a very large consumer electronics company, and they also do underwriting. Basically, they underwrite their dealers, right? And we were trying to tell them to do it in a different way, to use like models to do it. And then the same variables which I thought were explainable were not explainable to them, because for me, let's say I have an intuitive sense for uh, what a square or something means, versus for them, अरे तुम square क्यों कर रहे हो, square का क्या मतलब होता है, right?
Right.
So it's a spectrum. So what is intuitive to one person is not intuitive to another person, correct? So now actually it's a job that we have to do now as a community, to sit on top of this AI and make it explainable, to harness its value. I think that's going to be the really interesting piece. But I see it as a very, very important change in the way that we'll do lending in the future.
Awesome. By the way, we've spoken a lot in depth of how lending and how, this will change. But one of the things which I keep coming back to, and this
Yeah.
is like the last couple of questions I have.
Sure.
Actually, two only. One is, look, I see a lot of people, young folks who are around us. We've also evolved over time to figure out how lending, financial services, all these asset classes
Yeah.
are built.
Correct.
Think of somebody who's really young right now.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm surprised you could figure out that you wanted to lending. You although agreed that eventually you liked the people at Capital One, and then you figured, yeah, lending बढ़िया चीज़ है.
Correct.
And that tick of ensuring that let me try and build expertise in a thing which will last forever.
Correct.
Lending was one of that, and your organization
Yes.
was doing it. You're like, चलो इसी में कुछ करते हैं.
Correct.
Say somebody realizes that
Hmm.
and want to build their career.
Hmm.
I'm assuming academically लोग ज़्यादा नहीं कर पाएंगे.
Hmm.
Why I'd say that is also because although you didn't do an MBA, I was part of say an MBA ecosystem.
Yeah.
हम वहाँ पे रिस्क मैनेजमेंट भी पढ़ते हैं ना MBA में.
Correct.
वो रिस्क मैनेजमेंट बड़ा लंबा चौड़ा होता है, बट सारा का सारा मार्केट रिस्क पढ़ा रहे होते हैं वो.
Correct.
जबकि आप जब बैंक में या कंपनी में आके देखते हो,
Yeah.
90-95% पीपल आर पार्ट ऑफ क्रेडिट रिस्क फंक्शन.
Correct.
ऑप्स रिस्क, ये रिस्क, वो रिस्क. मार्केट रिस्क में 1-2% लोग होते हैं.
Correct.
सो प्राइमरली आई फील जब रिस्क मैनेजमेंट पढ़ा भी रहे होते हैं या पढ़ रहे होते हैं एकेडमिक्स में,
Yeah.
it is far more important to actually learn about credit
Yeah.
underwriting, which is
Correct.
never taught.
Correct.
But say for example, अब नौकरी तो लग गई है,
Hmm.
and people generally who are young want to actually build and kill
Correct.
and really understand the product, the life cycle, all of that without going through 2 down cycles, all of that.
Yeah.
How can they compound faster according to you? Because look, you've gone through the grind.
Correct.
What would be your top 2-3 suggestions? And I'm not trying to quantify it,
Yeah.
just trying to figure out what would you do,
Yeah.
well, if you could go back in time,
Yeah.
which right now we don't know how to, but
Yeah.
at least people who are interested can figure out
Yeah.
how can they compound faster in terms of their understanding of lending much better and faster.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is, if you want to learn anything, go to the company who's best at it. Right? Go to the company who is really good at it. Right? So I think the fact that we went to Capital One, like I went to Capital One, is still paying off. Right? And then the second thing I would say is, when you are there, when you are in the vicinity of people who know this thing very well, ask questions. Like invest in your education. Your education doesn't happen on its own. So I'll give you one incident from my tenure at Capital One. So I used to move around a lot. I did a lot of different things. I landed in a product role in Capital One, and there were no resources for 6 months. For 6 months, I was just waiting till resources got allocated to me so I can build something new. For those 6 months, I basically studied all credit decisions that had happened in the last 10 years. So Capital One had a repository of every large decision that they took, and the way it works in that company is that you write down your rationale of why you took a decision.
Oh, that is so priceless.
Yeah, you write down your rationale of why are you taking this decision, and then you monitor it. So every month, every 3 months, you see what happened, and then you reflect on it, and you say, why did we make the right decision or not, right? And I had this repository, so in those 5-6 months, I actually went through all the decisions, and I think I'm still learning from that.
I think this is such a great point, yeah.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it, although I was for the longest time surrounded by a lot of credit risk managers.
Yeah,
Since I've spent a lot of time in risk management as well in life,
correct.
we always used to look at a lot of these decisions from a portfolio lens.
Yes,
क्या होता था कि हम देखते थे अच्छा क्रेडिट मैनेजर है,
correct.
इनके इतनी बुक फटी,
हाँ,
इतनी नहीं फटी,
correct,
और फिर एक पोस्ट मॉनिटरिंग पोस्ट डिसबर्समेंट मॉनिटरिंग टीम होती थी,
correct.
वो ट्रैक करते रहते थे. हम कभी मैरी करके नहीं देखते थे
Exactly.
कि कितने लोग कहाँ कितना क्या हुआ, किसको कितना डिसबर्समेंट हुआ था, व्हाट वाज दी पोस्ट डिसबर्समेंट मॉनिटरिंग,
Correct.
और जिनकी अच्छी हुई है उनके लिए जो डिसीजन मेकिंग हुई थी
Correct.
वो कैसे हुई थी,
Correct.
किसने की थी.
Yeah.
I don't even think कि वैसे appraisals भी हो रहे थे just to marry that.
हाँ.
I think
But-
at subconscious level शायद जो head होते होंगे वैसे सोचते भी होंगे.
नहीं,
I never thought it.
मेमोज होते हैं. Like I think
Memo होते हैं भाई,
yes.
पर मैं कह रहा हूँ marrying
हाँ.
underwriting
Correct.
and post disbursement monitoring
Correct.
to do a reverse engineering to figure out कि सही हुआ है या नहीं हुआ था.
Correct.
वो मैंने कभी सोचा नहीं था. That's
Correct.
the
So I think
that's the nuance I am happy to figure out with you.
Yeah, I think that is fundamentally so. See, there are 3 ways of learning, right? One is that you learn from just thinking about things, right?
True.
Second is you learn from talking to people, right? So you learn from other people's mistakes. Third is you learn from doing yourself. Third is the most inefficient form of learning.
And longest also.
Very longest, right? So I think if you get really good at the first two, which is you can read, you can you can basically go into depth and figure out whatever documentation is available. You deep dive into that. You can learn from that. Second is you talk to people. You figure out people who are best in the business, and you ask them at the point in time when you are like, I'll give you another example from my career. So initially, I used to be not able to catch up to my seniors, right? तो वो लोग मीटिंग में कुछ बोल देते थे, जल्दी से कुछ कैलकुलेट कर लेते थे, मुझे समझ नहीं आता था क्या करना है, right? So what I used to do is I used to write these long emails. कि just like meeting, like minutes of the meeting, और उसमें अपने 10 क्वेश्चन चिपका देता था. So what that did was, and they patiently wrote back. What that did was कि अब I had 5 hours to go through this and think through this. So I understood what they were trying to say. And you have to be very honest to yourself about, did you actually understand what happened here? So I think that is the framework I would lay down, which is when you are in such a company or when you are in such a place where you have smart people around you, make sure you're making the best of that time, right? And don't wait for making those mistakes yourself. Just make sure you're learning most from the people around you, and that will happen when you do the work yourself. First job is to do the work yourself. You think through, you read all the things, and then you ask good questions. If you ask good questions, I haven't seen anybody, right, who has not answered a thought-provoking question. Anybody who's good at their job, and it's not like lending or anything else, even in the most senior people, if you ask a thought-provoking question, people will want to explain.
That's refreshing for them, na?
Yes, exactly.
क्योंकि वो रोज मंडेन कर रहे हैं, कुछ नया तो पूछ रहा है.
Exactly.
And thus, I think ego is the biggest constraint to deep thinking.
Yeah.
Or deep knowledge.
Correct.
क्योंकि अगर तो ईगो होता तो क्वेश्चन भी नहीं पूछता. तो बेशरम बन के पूछो ना क्वेश्चन.
बिल्कुल क्वेश्चन पूछो.
एंड मेरे ख्याल से था, क्योंकि मैं तो ये भी नहीं बोलना चाहता कि तुम यू आस्क गुड क्वेश्चंस. डोंट ट्राई एंड जस्टिफाई योरसेल्फ और गेट वैलिडेशन कि अच्छा भी है नहीं. तुझे नहीं समझ में आ रहा ना, बी डम फॉर वंस.
एग्जैक्टली.
बी डम फॉर वंस.
मतलब अपने आप को पुश करो, जितना तो समझ में आ रहा है उसके बाद पूछ लो यार.
वही तो यू सेड, क्वेश्चन पूछने से पहले यू थॉट अबाउट इट आल्सो ना. जितना एबिलिटी है सोचो तो.
एग्जैक्टली.
अब ये मत पूछो कि सर कहाँ न्यूयॉर्क कहाँ है, अभी जो चीज मिल सकती कर लो.
करेक्ट.
बट इफ यू कैन really think deeply and then ask questions, most people who are really good at it will be happy to see that question come in.
Yes.
Because it's not every day where thought-provoking questions are being thrown at you. But you've had the opportunity of having great mentors in your life.
Absolutely. I think there are there's probably 2 or 3 people from whom I've learned all sort of underwriting principles. So there's a guy called Brent Reynolds. He was my VP in Canada, and like fundamentals of all my thinking, come from him. Then there was another guy called Patrick Enns, who was till few months ago the CEO of Capital One Canada, who I reported to, and my sort of thought process around business sort of all come from him. And there's a guy called Nagraj, who is now the CRO for Avanti Finance. He was earlier in Moneyview. And a lot of my model thought process, comes from him. So I've had great mentors, and I think I'm just naming a few, but there are a lot more. And I was very lucky to be, a part of Capital One. And I think the same thing applies to Cred as well, right? I think I've learned a lot at Cred, and I think the same algorithm, right? You do your preparation, you ask good questions whenever the opportunity strikes, and you try to learn from people as much as possible. So that's the way I think you can compound as a young person, as an old person, and even an older person.
But anything specific, just before I let you go,
Yeah.
anything specific from a credit underwriting assessment prep, or is it just figure out? Because I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
in the past also, when we have spoken to people generally have tended to give this answer where कि यार बढ़िया mentor ढूंढो.
Correct.
And obviously we know of the fact that your average
Yeah.
of 5 people you spend more time with.
Correct.
Both of us, when we keep speaking about, now that both of us are not at Cred, we keep referring to Cred not because of the company it is,
Correct.
but the company of people we had.
Correct.
I think that is beyond anything. Like that's the most special thing for us when
Yes.
we think of it.
Correct.
Obviously you need to be in part of that company.
Yeah.
अब आपके जो peers हैं while you're young, वो इतने इंटेलिजेंट है नहीं, आपको
Correct.
डीप बनना है, that's where your
No,
mentors should
good
be.
point. So I think one thing I will definitely say, if you are specifically focusing on credit underwriting, you have to stay at a place. You have to stay at a place. Like you can't keep moving every year and assume that you'll actually learn underwriting. You will not.
Why is that?
Because you have to see the actions of people when things change. Right? So credit, see, fundamental credit is a cyclical business. Credit cycles will come. People will get exuberant. They will lend a lot. Things will go bad. Then people will get conservative, and then so that cycle happens. And the good or the bad thing about India is that the cycles here are much faster.
Shorter.
Right? Much shorter. Exactly. But if you leave at the wrong time, you would have never seen the part of that person when when you were in the exuberant part of the cycle.
And I think this is a great answer also because यार मतलब effectively credit underwriting is decision making.
Exactly.
और तुम decision लेके निकल गए अगर उस जगह से,
Exactly.
तुम्हें पता ही नहीं ना उसका after consequence क्या था.
Exactly.
Stay there.
Yes.
See the consequence.
Correct.
Only then you can judge कि आपकी decision making अच्छी हुई है नहीं.
करी हुई नहीं.
So I think that's why this answer makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. जो भी आपका डिसीजन है उसका जो भी लाइफ साइकिल है, तो जैसे कि अगर आप शॉर्ट टर्म लोन्स कर रहे हो तो मे बी आपको 3 साइकिल आपको 1.5-2 साल में दिख जाएंगे, राइट? पर अगर आप लोन ही कर रहे हो लाइक 60 महीने का, तो 2 साल से पहले आपको नहीं पता चलेगा कि क्या हुआ, लाइक डिड यू मेक द राइट डिसीजन इनिशियली और नॉट, यू विल नॉट नो, राइट? देयर इज नो वे ऑफ नोइंग. एंड इफ यू डोंट see, I said in the beginning that there are 3 forms of learning and the third is the hardest one, the slowest one, but that is the one which is the most like personal also, right? That is the one that really changes you in a significant way also, which is you made a decision and you experience the consequence, right? So you have to stay at a place. I think this is the main thing I see being different, because there's a lot more opportunity right now, and fintech is hot, credit is hot, so people are moving around a lot, and I think that's going to be ultimately not, this is also a cycle. So this current crop of credit underwriting talent will not grow at the same rate if they keep moving around, and they are very talented people in the ecosystem right now. So if you are a young person who has stepped into credit underwriting, please just make sure you choose the right company, and when you have chosen, just stay for a few years even if things are bad, because that's how it's always going to be.
I think, by the way, you should figure see. I would request you to see the Vikas podcast also.
Yes.
Because when we were asking him what should a young person do great
Yeah.
in sales, for example,
Yes.
he was like, if you want to be great at sales, join a company which is great at sales.
Correct.
You also spoke that if you want to really understand. So I think
Correct.
a lot of times if you want to learn an art or a skill,
Yes.
join set of people or an organization or
Correct.
an system
Correct.
which is great at it.
Yes.
Because they have gone through the grind to figuring out what's right.
Correct.
How is that right? How is that great?
What good looks like.
What good looks like,
Yeah.
feels like, works like.
Correct.
And then you can really stay there for a considerable period of time and learn the art really well from the people who have done it.
Correct.
So I think that's also an underlying thing, at least since I keep talking to a lot of these different set of questions and we talk to different people.
Yeah.
I think that's a great similarity with what you said and Vikas also said.
Yeah. The thing is, if you learn one thing in a lot of depth, right? So if you start anywhere, like start in sales, start in content underwriting, but if you learn anything in a lot of depth, that gives you a deep perspective through which you can look at any other problem. And see, at a senior level, that is the only thing that counts. The only thing that you do on a daily level is you bring perspective. Right? That you bring perspective. So develop that perspective. When you're young, your only job is to develop that perspective. And you can start in any place. It doesn't matter. But you have to go deep and truly understand one thing very, very well. And then you will see that it's actually much easier for you to learn anything new. Because you will know what good looks like. Like you will understand what understanding feels like.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today.
Absolutely.
And this is something I generally ask as a favor, also as a question.
Yeah.
Given that you enjoyed,
Yeah.
in your network,
Yes.
who do you think are 3 people who should come on the podcast and we should, speak to them?
Absolutely. So I think one person you should definitely speak to is Kiran. Kiran runs an NBFC, a very good one. It's called Saman. You should definitely get him. I think he is on the lending side also. I think he's one person who's figured out the operational side of lending really well.
Oh, nice.
So he will be a good person to talk to.
We would love to break down how lending should be looked at. All of those things I can think of, right?
Correct. So I think he's definitely one good person to talk to. The other person, I think, Nagraj is here. So he's in Avanti Finance. So I think that he is another good person to talk about lending better than I am. I think actually having Jay Shah, who's now in Kotak, who used to be in Capital One, will be a good person to have because he's very sorted as a person. And he was in Capital One in the sort of earlier days, and he's seen India. Now he's in Kotak, so he'll also be a great person to have on the podcast.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Any questions for me?
Oh, lots. Are we doing that?
No, if you want to.
No, I wanted to ask, what is your objective with this podcast? What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, great question. Not a lot of people generally check that with me. I think, look, I've always figured that a lot of people, just to give you an analogy, a lot of people celebrate Elon Musk. Nothing against him. He's a great guy. But there are geniuses who work with him. And they get underappreciated, under-celebrated. And I've gotten an opportunity of working with a lot of such geniuses. अब तू थोड़ा embarrassed हो जाएगा, but you've been a great guy I've worked with. For example, Cred में जब हम थे, Akshay is a great guy, Rahul is a great guy.
Correct.
ठीक है, Tripti is a great person who worked for us, मतलब what she did, crazy.
Correct.
Vinayak is a great guy.
Correct.
ठीक है, और भी I'm sure, मतलब और 5 लोग मुझे गाली देंगे जो मेरा नाम नहीं लिया. Similarly, I was at.
Actually, मैंने क्रेड वाले लोग तो जानबूझ के हटा दिया, but I think.
अरे मैं एक example दे रहा हूँ because both of us have experienced the same.
Correct.
Then but क्या है कि and by the way, तो मेरा जो banking ecosystem उसमें बहुत सच में बहुत amazing लोग हैं.
Correct.
ठीक है, मतलब banks also get painted in a way कि अरे भाई slow है ऐसा वैसा. But look, I work with really exceptional people, यार.
Yeah.
As we were discussing, give me one bank vis-a-vis the number of fintechs.
Yeah.
मतलब percentage of companies which are more profitable. I'm sure banks know how to make money. So I think a lot of these great operators, executors who execute visions of these really senior people, I think those people get underappreciated. They have a lot of insights. And I think if we generally assume and figure out कि your network is your net worth, I would want to build my network with people who have really deeper understanding because I'm not great at deeper understanding. And as you said, वो 3 तरीके से आप understand कर सकते हो. The easiest for me, because I'm generally happy discussing things with people. The easiest for me to acquire a lot of knowledge is by talking to people.
Yeah.
तो यार उनको भी celebrate करो. People who are great I've met. Form a great network of such people, and I get to learn a lot. Like ये चीज़ तो दिमाग में अब आ गई ना कि while we were discussing that anybody who's young should have a great mentor. And trust me, I've met so many young folks who do not have mentors.
Yeah.
And I can say this from my point of view now that 40-50 age ये वो तामझाम जनता है. Trust me, if you're showing intent, most good people would love to be mentors.
Correct.
ठीक है. तो mentors तो अवेलेबल है, mentee मिल नहीं रहे हैं और हम ये पॉइंट बना रहे हैं. एटलीस्ट मैं लर्न कर रहा हूँ, बट हु इज सेइंग दैट मैं बुढ़ा हो गया हूँ. भाई मैं भी तो किसी 60 या मेरे से ज़्यादा एक्सपीरियंस बंदे से मिल सकता हूँ. एंड बाय द वे, इट्स नॉट द एज. Somebody must have 10 years of experience in podcasting who might be 30 years old.
Correct.
I'm happy to become their mentee. Bhai, they can be my mentor.
Of course.
So it's nothing to do with age. So I think just to have the ability to learn and celebrate such people who the world is not celebrating, and I really respect them. This is just a win-win situation in my head. So that's why I'm doing this podcast.
Thank you for considering me worthy of that honor.
पर मजा आया आपको?
बहुत मजा आया.
चलो.
Thank you. चलो. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching the video. If you like the video, please press the like button. Subscribe if you like it, and if you can share it with your friends, I'll be really happy about it. We are working really hard to make good videos, and hopefully future videos will be as exciting as the one you just saw. Thank you.